Welcome to Discover the Showboat, a city at sea, a collection of video tours presented by Battleship volunteers. Battleship North Carolina, an extraordinary ship that steamed into history. In these videos, enjoy the compartments, equipment, documents, and photographs, and hear the stories that celebrate the young men who proudly served on the most highly decorated American battleship of World War II, their home.
Hi, I'm Battleship volunteer Lori Spencer, and it's my pleasure today to introduce you to the butcher shop, a very small area for a very big job. The Navy required 12 to 20 ounces of meat, fish, or chicken per man per day. So let's say for a given day that the recipe called for 20 ounces. Well, this is a Navy training course, so they could see how they wanted to break it up. If it was 20 ounces of meat that day, that translates to 1.25 pounds of meat per man. Now, during the height of the war, there were 2,300 men on board, so that meant that 2,875 pounds of meat had to be prepared in this room for the very following day. Let's take a little tour of our butcher shop. We'll begin just the way the meat would begin, and 4 sides of beef would be delivered, and they would be hung way up here on these hooks. And just keep in mind that this whole portion of the room would be taken up with those sides of beef. So I wouldn't be able to walk where I'm walking right now. They would take one of the sides down and they would weigh it. The reason that they weighed it was the military had guidelines. You're going to get a different amount of meat out of a 100-pound side of beef than you are out of a 150-pound side of beef. So after it was weighed, it would be placed on this Bureau bandsaw. The bandsaw would be adjusted to fit the piece of meat. The very sharp blade isn't on it now, but this meat would be cut right through bones. The bones were saved for soups and stews and gravies. They didn't waste anything that they didn't have to. Now, once we got the piece of beef, we can work on it in smaller portions that were a little easier. It might be worked on in the butcher block. It might be being trimmed. There were slicing machines here that are not here now, so maybe that given day some of it was being sliced. We have a Hobart meat grinder. That was used often. That was used for meatloaf or preparing hamburger. And that machine is right here, and that would grind. It was electric. It would grind 20 to 25 pounds of beef per minute. Now, with our slicing machines that were gone, and then we end up back where we had the sink that ran hot and cold water for cleaning up. Now, there was a lot of things missing in this room that would be here when they were working. Besides the meat, besides the machines, if you're grinding 20 to 25 pounds per minute, you have to have something here such as a table, large bowls to contain that meat. When you're trimming meat, you're going to have leftovers. You're going to have pieces of meat that you're not going to want to use, or some fats were used. But you'd have big garbage pails that were in here as well. There was also a sink and some extra hooks around the room. So working conditions were very, very crowded. But that's just a little bit of a picture of what went on every single day. Again, because of our wonderful archives and the Navy's stringent recording requirements, I have in front of me, and you will be seeing as well, just 2 sample orders. The first on July 4th, 1942, you can see that they kept very accurate records of the quantity, the cost per pound, and their total cost. So our total for July 4th was $3,935 in 1943. Now, just because I was a math teacher in my former life, I find these things absolutely fascinating, and the scope of the money that it took to run the ship. I went to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and Consumer Price Index and found that that figure on the bottom, 62,766,000, is what it would cost today. The next order for September 19th, 1942 is another sample of the exact quantities, the exact cost per pound, and the total costs. That one, $4,852 in 1943, is a whopping $77,401 today. Now, this is just the butcher shop. Remember that there were many, many other departments on board that could give the same financial statements and the same conversions. It cost a tremendous amount of money to run the USS North Carolina. Okay, how are these orders delivered? If we were in port, such as New York, San Francisco, Pearl Harbor, we would already be dockside so that it was easy for the orders to come alongside and be offloaded onto the ship. If we were out at sea, that would be a whole different situation. And they had very large supply ships that would bring out the supplies, pull alongside, and be offloaded in that manner. Occasionally, if it was brought to us that way, there was a little bit of a condition of spoilage. If they were taken out of freezer and spent too long a time before it was offloaded, we would have some spoilage. As you can see, we had a spoilage of a lamb order. And what would happen in that case? It would be immediately returned and expunged from the books. Let's take a little bit of time to talk about where the meat was kept and how it arrived in this room. The meat was kept on the deck below in cold storage. There were 3 units, and if we want to think about what size those units were, our 18 cubic foot refrigerator, we could fit 242 of those down there. The meat was kept at 15 degrees. There were even other storage units down there. They were kept at different temperatures for dairy and fruits and vegetables and things like that. All right, now how did it get from there to here? A block and chain was used to get it up to this level, and then the men had to carry it the rest of the way to get it to the butcher shop. Okay, now that we've taken our little tour of the butcher shop, let's talk a little bit about how the meat actually came into this room. Well, sometimes it came in, as we talked about, with carcasses hanging from the hooks, but a lot of the time we were able to get 50-pound boxes of cut-up meat frozen. There are a lot of advantages to that. You could stack them without a lot of waste. Carrying them up here, 50 pounds is a lot less than 150 pounds. They were solidly frozen, less chance of bacteria. And the last thing about that is some of the butchers here were pretty inexperienced. So it was much easier for them to deal with smaller pieces than cutting up a whole carcass. So we were very happy, and I'm sure the men were very happy when they got to see that their stores for that day were going to be in 50-pound boxes. Because of the size of our ship and all that we've been talking about, the large quantities of everything, we had another job to do. We traveled with destroyers, which were much smaller than we were. So part of our job was to provide some supplies for the destroyers should they need them. We also would refuel them. They would run out of fuel faster than we would. And when we were dealing with the destroyers, remember, we had a dentist, we had doctors, we had a machine shop to repair broken parts. Those ships didn't have that kind of thing. So that was one of our jobs, was to take care of the destroyers. Now, as they were coming, we really looked forward to them because on the other hand, they would bring us mail, and they would bring us perhaps movies, and we would trade movies and things like that. So that was another part of our job. So, who were the personnel in this room and what were their conditions like? There were 4 to 5 butchers here every day. They reported at noon. Their job was to prepare all the meat for the following day. Sometimes that would take them well into the evening. The conditions, we've already talked about how crowded it was, but we were in the South Pacific. Air conditioning was only in select areas on the ship. This was not one of the select areas. So it would have been very warm. Plus, if the ship was underway, the engine room was directly below this area, heat rises, the conditions would have been difficult as far as temperature was concerned. So you may say, well, why in the world would they want to be here? When the war was over and all of the servicemen came home, remember, these men had a leg up because they had a trade. There were many areas on the ship that did that same thing. The machine shop, the bake shop, and bookkeeping, the print shop, they would have a leg up on having a job. After the Depression, a lot of jobs weren't available. Some women were in positions formerly held by men, and the influx was so many men that that was a very big opportunity for them. Even if they didn't want to be a butcher, they could go on to school while holding a position as a butcher. As you can tell by this cartoon by crew member Walter Ash, while lighthearted and all in good fun, it was no joke that these men worked in tight quarters and had to get along, especially in the presence of so many sharp knives. Note, the butcher shop is called Hector's Chop House. Hector's Chop House refers to Lincoln Hector, who was the first man in charge of the butcher shop. Lincoln joined the Navy in 1936 and served in the Asiatic Fleet. And then he was lucky enough to be what is called a plank owner. That meant that he came aboard and was on board on the day that the ship was commissioned, which is April 9th, 1941. Lincoln was well liked by the other butchers, and interesting to note, he was called the Old Man. Well, that in itself isn't much until you know that Lincoln was 21 years old. Therefore, the other butchers were probably between 17 and 20 and right out of high school. So Lincoln would have had to keep an eye on everybody, and I'm sure it required a lot of training. Lincoln, a couple little side stories about Lincoln I'd kind of like to share with you. One time, he was ordering liver, and he ordered 400 pounds of liver. Well, somewhere between the ship and the ordering and the receiving, a zero was added. So Lincoln ended up with 4,000 pounds of liver, which he knew the crew would not be happy about. So he returned 3,600 pounds of liver and expunged it from the books. Another little sidelight about him, I would have liked to have met him. He had a tooth issue, so he went down to sick bay. And sick bay said, "No, we don't have anything for that. You better go see the dentist." So he went up to the dentist, who said to him, "Oh dear, you need all 4 wisdom teeth removed. And when you come to your appointment, bring me a nice sandwich. And since you're from the butcher shop, I'm going to be looking for quality. And you might want to know that the quality is going to be directly related to the amount of pain you're going to have in this procedure." In closing, I'd like to mention a couple things about the refrigerator and our beloved butcher block. It pays to have a volunteer that lives in the neighborhood that's very good at woodworking, and to be married to another one who's a volunteer who is into construction and woodworking. This refrigerator obviously didn't have these kind of doors when we first came on board. So no one could see into it. And we wanted to show the variety of things that they offered the servicemen. So my husband and my neighbor, Bob Bates and Leo Spencer, they took the doors off, constructed a new frame for it, and put in the plexiglass so that you can see it. And then we go to my beloved butcher block. One time I was doing a 101, a docent, and I had a family hang back a little bit. His name is Chris McMillan. And he looked at me and he said, You didn't have that old white table in here. Look at that picture. There was a butcher block. And I said, yes, but butcher blocks are way too expensive. We're a self-supporting museum. And he said, whoa, wait, I have my grandfather's butcher block in my barn. He was a butcher during World War II time, so it's time appropriate. And of course, my heart started pounding, but I don't have the authority. So through the wonderful powers that be in the ship and through UPS, and we got this butcher block all the way from Knoxville, Tennessee to where it stands today. It needed a little bit of repair, which once again, my same team replaced a couple of boards. This one is 1 inch bigger than the one that was on board, so it was absolutely perfect. And they did build a knife rack because that was in the original picture, and we knew everybody would come through and say, what's that? Or where's the knife rack? So as a docent, this is my sincere privilege to have had something to do with leaving something that's going to stay in the battleship long after I'm not doing this anymore. Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching Discover the Showboat, a collection of videos from the Battleship North Carolina in Wilmington, North Carolina. Visit us online at www.battleshipnc.com. The Showboat welcomes visitors daily. In 2020, the Battleship North Carolina received an NC Cares Humanities Relief Grant from the North Carolina Humanities Council, www.nchumanities.org. Funding for NC Cares has been provided by the National Endowment for the Humanities as part of the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act Economic Stabilization Plan.